Welcome back to Biographics. I'm your host, Eric Malachite, and today we're talking about Jan Palach, a bite-sized bio written by the ever-capable Arnaldo Tyranny. Be sure to check the links in the description, like, comment, and subscribe, and without further delay, let's get into it. In the first half of 1968, a window of hope and freedom opened beyond the Iron Curtain. A new government in Czechoslovakia dared to do the unthinkable in Soviet-controlled totalitarian Eastern Europe, and that was abolish censorship and liberalize society. The party leaders in Moscow did not tolerate the outrage of what became known as the Prague Spring and responded to societal reforms with tanks. One young man in Prague could not stand aside and bear a life under tyranny. To reawaken the consciousness of his people, he would undergo a fiery sacrifice and become a human torch. This is the story of Jan Palach, martyr of the Prague Spring. Jan Palach was born on August 11th, 1948 and I could not find a Czech pronunciation guide for this, so I'm going to do the best I can. Vysrtati, some 30 kilometers north of the capital Prague of modern-day Czech Republic, back then Czechoslovakia. A few months earlier, in February 1948, a government crisis prompted the local Communist Party, with Soviet backing, to seize power in a coup. Czechoslovakia found itself under totalitarian communist rule, with all the expected consequences: arrests, purges, executions, and mass immigrations. Jan's parents, Josef and Libuše, chose not to flee the country, despite them being not aligned to communist ideology and owning a small sweet factory. Private enterprise did not sit well with the government, and in the early 1950s, they had to shut down their business and take salaried jobs at a local mill and train station. In spite of this experience, Libuše formally joined the Communist Party in 1957. It was not an easy decision, but this would ensure that Jan and his older brother Jiří could attend secondary education. At primary school, Jan had excelled in all subjects and was remembered as an avid chess player, reader, and jogger. In September 1963, he joined a secondary school in Melnik, where he continued to impress his history, geography, and social sciences teachers. In June 1966, Jan passed his final school exams and set out to study history at Charles University in Prague. Jan absolutely nailed his entrance exams, but a surplus in applicants meant that he had to enroll in his second choice of subject, agricultural economics. Rather than complaining, Jan plunged into lectures, exam sessions, and student life. In 1967 and early 1968, he participated in a university trip to Kazakhstan, organized a work experience expedition to Leningrad, and was co-founder of the Academic Council of Students. More importantly, he was active in distributing copies of writings by authors critical of communist regimes, such as Alexander Solzhenitsyn, a survivor of the Gulag system, and Czech journalist Ludvík Vaculík. Vaculík would, of course, be one of the protagonists of the so-called Prague Spring. This period of reform started in January 1968 when Alexander Dubček became head of the Communist Party, replacing hardliner Antonín Novotný. Dubček removed censorship, stimulating free debate about government policies amongst the public. In April, he issued a plan for further societal reforms, aiming at liberalizing society within a Marxist-Leninist framework. Soviet Premier Leonid Brezhnev did not tolerate such deviation from party orthodoxy, thus ordering Warsaw Pact troops to intervene and install a pro-Soviet leader in Prague. The Warsaw Pact tanks rolled into Czechoslovakia on August 20th, 1968, interrupting the dreams and hopes of millions of Czechoslovaks, especially young students. Western powers condemned the invasion but refrained from intervening directly. The crackdown of the Prague Spring was quick and brutal, but small-scale resistance against the invasion forces continued until 1969. Eventually, in April 1969, Dubček was ousted from power. His successor, Gustav Husak, rolled back Dubček's reforms, inaugurating a period of normalization which reinstated censorship and limitations on freedom of movement. Jan Palach and his fellow university students had clearly had a ball during the short-lived spring. This is why, when the Soviets and their allies took control of the country, Palach decided to act immediately. His first acts of resistance were limited to scrawling anti-occupation slogans on the streets of Prague and his hometown Vyšehrady. But as of October 1968, Jan took part in street protests, and in November 1968, he joined the occupation of a factory. All these acts of insubordination were ultimately unsuccessful. Jan's friends later recalled that during this period, he started to plan a more radical act to shake the conscience of the public. In early January 1969, Jan described his first plans in a letter to Vladimir Holacek, leader of a student association at Charles University. Jan's project was to assemble a group of determined students and occupy the main building of the Czechoslovak radio to broadcast an appeal for a general strike. Industrial action was the means to reach the abolition of censorship. A later investigation found that Holacek did not reply to Jan's letter, which may have prompted him to plan another course of action, one which would require less preparation but would have undoubtedly shocking effects. On January 15, 1969, Jan was back in Vyšehrady to attend the funeral of an uncle. By the morning of the 16th, he was back in Prague in the Sporilov student dormitory. In his room, Jan drafted 4 nearly identical letters, which he signed the following as Torch Number 1. He addressed 3 of them to Holacek and other friends, placing the 4th one in his briefcase. In these letters, he claimed to be a member of a group ready to immolate themselves to motivate people into action against Soviet occupation. He also demanded the lifting of censorship, the resignation of the Soviet-friendly ministers, and the banning of Spravy, the official paper of the occupation forces. Finally, he exhorted the Czechoslovaks to stage ongoing general strikes until these demands were met. Jan concluded his letters by stating that if such demands were not met by January 21st, other torches would catch fire. Meaning people, of course. People torches. Jan posted the letters and then brought 2 plastic containers which he filled with petrol. By 2:30 p.m. of January 16, 1969, Jan was standing by the fountain in Wenceslas Square in central Prague. With no rush nor hesitation, Jan opened up one of the containers and poured its contents all over himself. It was time now to enact the ultimate sacrifice, the definitive act of protest, the cry for attention and against tyranny, from which there would be no return. In mere seconds, Jan truly became Torch Number 1. Engulfed in flames, the young protester ran across Wenceslas Square before falling to the ground. Some passerby came to the rescue, putting out the fire. Jan, still conscious, asked them to open his briefcase and read the letter it contained. Jan was then loaded onto an ambulance and taken to Vyšehrady Hospital, where he would be admitted at 2:45 p.m. He clearly explained to the nurses that his was not a case of self-deletion. His was an act of protest similar to those enacted by Buddhist monks in Vietnam. On the following day, January 17th, Jan was still conscious, despite having suffered 2nd and 3rd degree burns over 85% of his body. He was visited by a psychiatrist doctor, and I'm going to do my best here because I could not find a pronunciation guide, Kuminikova, to whom he repeated the demands laid out in his letter. Jan also reassured her that he was indeed part of a larger group of dissidents, all of them ready for self-immolation, but he would not reveal their identities. The existence of the other torches is disputed, and it is now commonly accepted that Jan had acted entirely alone. But even if he was a lone actor, his deed inspired multitudes. On January 18th, a spontaneous demonstration in Jan's honor took place in Prague, attracting thousands of young people. In defiance of the police and occupation forces, they dared chanting slogans against censorship, the Soviets, and Leonid Brezhnev. On January 19th, Palach asked to see his friend Eva Bednarikova and the student leader Lubomir Holacek. When they arrived at the hospital, Jan asked them to tell other dissident friends and students not to follow his example, not to immolate themselves. After Eva and Lubomir left, Jan's conditions quickly worsened. At 3:30 p.m., Jan Palach reached the end of his journey. His cause of death was recorded as pneumonia resulting from the burns. On the day of Jan's death, the Czechoslovak security services were put on high alert and cracked down against the media, allowing papers to publish only official press releases. But the authorities were less effective in controlling the spontaneous reaction of the people in the streets. On January 20th, tens of thousands of mourners staged a remembrance march. Then, on the 24th and 25th, an even larger crowd filed into Charles University to attend Jan's memorial service. The event was attended by two government representatives, Education Minister Bezdicek and Sports Minister Bosak. Neither of them was a public figure of particular relevance, as they had both been appointed only 2 weeks prior. We should clarify that at this stage, the reformer Dubček had not been replaced by Brezhnev's minion Husak. Clearly, his government was not willing to risk associating too strongly with Palach's cause, not while the Warsaw Pact troops were still around. On January 26th, a crowd assembled in Wenceslas Square. Some 3,000 demonstrators walked through the city center, eventually engaging in a battle with the police. Almost 200 young demonstrators were beaten and arrested. By now, the secret police, the STB, had reached the conclusion that Palach was not part of a larger organized group of torches. Nonetheless, his act inspired others to stage similar acts of protest. Between January and April 1969, there were 29 self-immolation attempts, but only 3 cases, including Jan's, were confirmed to be politically motivated. The other 2 cases concerned Jan Sait and Evgen Plochek, who set themselves on fire on February 25th and April 9th, respectively. The ultimate sacrifices enacted by Palach, Sait, and Plochek, as well as the popular demonstrations they inspired, ultimately failed to lift the iron heel of the Soviets and their allies from Czechoslovakia. And so the winter of discontent snuffed out the spring of Prague. What was probably worse, the STB tried to wipe out Jan Palach from collective memory. In the months following his death, the STB effectively hindered any project to erect a monument in his honor. In 1973, they even launched a special operation codenamed Grave to remove Jan's burial from the Olszany Cemetery in Prague, as it attracted too many people. After months of pressure and bullying from the STB, in October, Jan's mother and brother, Libuše and Jiří, consented to the exhumation and cremation of his body. Libuše received the urn with Jan's ashes, but she had to wait until March 1974 before she was allowed to bury her son in the cemetery of his hometown, Vyšehrady. Despite the best efforts of the secret police, Jan Palach was not completely erased from people's memory, and he continued to be hailed as a martyr both at home and abroad. 15 years later, the so-called Velvet Revolution brought the communist regime to an end. Jan's ashes returned to Prague on October 25, 1990. Jan's self-immolation has since inspired a lively debate on the effectiveness and morals of his act. On one hand, Jan's sacrifice inspired thousands of young people to continue to demonstrate and resist against the Soviet occupation. On the other hand, it could be argued that these efforts were eventually fruitless against the might of the Warsaw Pact, and that Jan's death led other young men to meet a similar end. What we would like to commemorate here at Biographics is the selflessness at the heart of Jan's gesture, rather than the gesture itself. And we could not express it better than Pastor Jakub Trojan's speech at Jan's funeral. In the cynical century in which we are often scared by others and others are scared by us, in a century in which we are often startled by our own small-mindedness, he made us ask a question that can make great people of us. What did I do for others? What is my heart like? What is my aim? And what is the highest priority in my life? I hope you enjoyed that video and found it as eye-opening as I did. Be sure to do all that algorithmic jazz and keep it tuned here to Biographics for more bite-sized bios like this. I'm Eric Malachite, and I'll see you next time, Space Cowboy.